Ray is the most successful hedge fund manager of our time, but probably most integral to your success is the way you built the culture at Bridgewater, centered around this idea of radical transparency. You shared a lot of these principles in your book, Principles, Life and Work, the best-selling book. I know many of you in this room probably have read it. So we're going to learn some of these tools from Ray, and if you would like to ask him a question, you can use your smartphone, your tablet, or your laptop. Go to slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, type in the code GEF, and you can submit your questions, and we're looking forward to a great presentation by Ray. We will have a networking break afterward, but please be back by 4 p.m. And Ray, without further ado, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, do I use this one or this one?
The lob, right?
Okay, so I don't have to stand over here. Okay, thank you. What we're going to do is talk about decision making. Just by way of background, I'm at a stage in my life where I'm trying to pass along some of the principles that have helped me. I think basically life exists in 3 phases. In the first phase, you're dependent on others and you're learning. In the second phase, others are dependent on you, you're working and you're trying to be successful. And then as I move to the third phase, my goal is to help other people be successful without me. So I'm trying to pass along certain principles. I wrote a book on principles, which was life and work principles. And then I'm going to be I'm now in the midst of writing a book which will be economic and investment principles. And then basically everything I have to say is out and then I'll go quiet. But anyway, when we talk about, what things are likely to happen and what stocks to buy or anything else, we're really talking about knowing how things work. In other words, there's a machine. Everything works like a machine, and the machine happens over and over again. And so principles are ways of dealing with reality to be successful. Every successful person has principles. I got in the habit of writing down my principles. It began when I first had the notion of when I did a trade, I wrote down the criteria that I would use to make that trade. And then with a period of time, I learned that if I could write those criteria down in a very specific way, in a very clear way, I could see how those decisions would have worked in the past. And that gave me perspective. And then I learned that if I could write those down clearly enough, I could create, then were formulas, today they call them algorithms, that would then take in data. And I found that that data, when it came in, could be processed a lot better by the computer than by me, because I couldn't process a lot of information. I couldn't process a lot of information, not nearly as much. I couldn't process information nearly as quickly, nearly as accurately, nearly as emotionally easy as I could with that machine. So my basic dynamic became to write down my criteria for making decisions and then putting them into algorithms and then building essentially the equivalent of a computer chess game. If you think I'm playing computer, you could build that computer chess game that would use your criteria for making decisions and have it operate in parallel with my own decision making, so that when they were at odds, I would reconcile them. More often than not, the computer was doing a better job than me because it would calculate things that are sometimes very complex, correlations between different asset classes and the like, and so on. Okay, also, what I learned was the best way to run a culture was to have a real idea meritocracy. In other words, let the best ideas win. So rather than just me making ideas, I learned through the difficulty of it that if I could have people stress test my ideas, and we could stress test each other's ideas so that we could argue, we could have thoughtful disagreement, we would raise the probability of coming up with the best ideas. We would draw out the best ideas, And by using also algorithms and rules, we could think through the criteria for making decisions rather than just make decisions. We could think through the criteria of making decisions and can have perspective on that. And then if you just make your criteria for making decisions, then you can accumulate that and you can compound your knowledge. So we created an idea meritocracy. And so just to give you, so what I'm going to describe here, I've explained more about principles, but I'm going to describe from principles to algorithms to computerized decision making. And this is just literally a yellow pad that sort of gives you an idea of like how I would scribble out these rules, and I would write them, and when they get programmed in, and that's back in the old days, and we would put them back into computers. And then what I learned from that is that my alphas, my return streams, from the decision rules, not the return streams from the markets. The return streams from the decision rules, in other words, my alphas of how I would try to beat the market, could be produced in looking back how that would work. So these are just different decision rule return streams, and it shows what their accumulated result is. And it's different from the market. For example, think about it. If you were to be short the market, it would be the opposite of what the stock market did or whatever the market did, right? And so then if you're active, I buy, sell, then you'll have those return streams. And having that perspective of how I would have made decisions in the past and doing that with other people so we could examine the criteria for saying what are the best ways to make decisions, gave us a perspective and gave us an ability to operate in that way. And then I realized that I could have the computer talk to me. I could program it in such a way where what we call it is auto text. But just like my own brain would describe what it was seeing, I could make the computer, we could make the computer, speak to us in terms of that. And so literally write reports. This is just a piece of, I did a study on debt. It was Principles for Understanding Big Debt Crises. By the way, it's free online if anybody wants to download it, Principles for Understanding Big Debt Crises. And the back part of that is all written by the computer, because of the criteria put in the computer, and it can communicate with me, and I can communicate with the computer that way. And I found that to be, tremendously helpful. So then I wanted this idea meritocracy, and then I realized that what I was doing in the investment business, I could do in the management of the company. In other words, when I started Bridgewater, it was me, two-bedroom apartment, and so on, and the investment part of it and the managing the company part of it both grew up from under me. So I was responsible. I had two responsibilities: to make good investment decisions and then also to run a company. And so as I was dealing with the running the company part of it, and I wanted to do the algorithms, I realized that I could do the same thing for making management decisions, and we could collectively do the same thing for making management decisions, which would make for a better culture. In other words, if together, collectively, you can agree on how you're going to be with each other, and you write that in rules and what the best rules are, first of all, you have principles that everybody will understand. You could say, am I going to live by those principles? You could see those work principles written in my book, Principles, Life, and Work. But that also required me to think about how I was going to do that. So I realized that I could, anything pretty much that my brain could do or see or think, I could, with the help of a lot of people, convert into computers doing the same thing, if I thought about it. And that produced this sort of compounding. So this is just a wheel that we think of, or these are various apps that I've created or we've created over a period of time that describes the things that we do. So I'm going to shift my attention from investment decision making and draw your attention to management decision making and try to convey how to have an idea meritocracy. Because the most important thing is how you make decisions. So when you start to think about the power of an idea meritocracy and the power of using various apps to collect data and to help you through that, that's very powerful. So I want to quickly take you through what those apps look like. You know, there are a number of apps, but starting at the bottom of that and thinking of it as somewhat of a sequence. Before hiring, you want to think about what we think of as a role spec. What is the type of person that we want to fit into a job? Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. Everybody thinks differently. And so when you think in each job, what is the type of person that will be best for that job? Sometimes a very creative person might not be organized, or a very organized person may not be creative, and somebody has different skills. And so you need to write a job spec. What type of person do I want in that in a very specified way? Because we use a lot of data to describe people, what they're like, we have these components. It's almost like, think of a person as being like a Lego set of attributes, okay? They have all those attributes, like a Lego set. And then you say, what are the attributes and what colors do I want those to be? And that's a job spec. And related to that, there's a tool called the Combinator that looks at people who work at Bridgewater, and it looks at those and it says, what are their attributes? So if I'm thinking, okay, I don't know, there's Russell, and here's Russell, and what's he like? It will convert him into his component parts, his Lego bits. And so if I could say, I'd like a Russell, and I'd like a Sally, and Harry, because they're doing great at that job, what are their attributes? I can reverse engineer that and say, okay, now what are their attributes, because I want to get another one of those. So that's how you got the job spec. That's what that tool is. Then before a person comes, we want to look at them. So we want to look at them and make an assessment. So there are, what information do you get? You get a resume, and you get, and we ask them to take some personality profile tests that sort of give an idea of what their personality profiles are, and so on. And we can extract from that information, just like you would look at a resume. You might say in a resume, oh, this person is very linear. They've always stayed on a track. They've done very well in school, and so on. Somebody else, they might say, oh, they're very creative. They're interested in operating in this way. Whatever the criteria are in your own head, you could look at that and convert a resume into data, and it could read it the way that you want to read your resume to make those assessments. And you can do that in conjunction with others, so that now you can read a resume, or you could have the computer read the resume and discern what you want out of that resume. And that, together with tests, these personality profile tests, help us identify those who have the specifications that we're looking for to narrow down before we do interviews and discussions like that. And so that's what that first combination of apps, first the spec, and then the assessments and the resumes. Okay, then through interviews and so on, we hire a person, and then we have them go through courses and cases. Now, because get this, we tape almost everything for everybody to see. We have radical transparency. And that doesn't mean that we have personal matters discussed or proprietary matters discussed. But in order for me to run an idea meritocracy, I wanted everybody to be able to see anything so that there would be an understanding that there's no spin. And then they could be able to question me on anything, and we can have it. That power of being able to have radical truthfulness and radical transparency has the effect of building trust, building understanding. I mean, we can get into hell of an arguments about things, but we're still having that radical truthfulness and that radical transparency to work ourselves through. And because of that, we can take people into experiences that existed before, because what we've done is to create these cases that are virtual experiences. And what I mean by that is you'll go into a realistic case, and you'll be sitting there, and it's happening, just like reality TV, and it'll pause, and it'll ask you questions. What's your reaction? What would you do in that situation? So it creates a virtual experience, and it also collects data on people to see what their reactions are, and it starts to integrate on that. So that's what the courses and cases are. That's what they do that in a boot camp, we call it, a 3-week boot camp. Then we have a tool which we call a coach. And a coach is something in which, rather than there being a book of principles and so on, which there is, but it's more, it's a system in which one says, I've got this type of problem, or I've got this type of situation, and what principle would be most helpful? And it then directs them to the principles. And that tool also, we let people, it's built so that people could put in their own principles. I think this would be something that is very, very helpful to other people. I would recommend it to you all, that rather than to just make decisions, when you're making decisions, think about your criteria for making decisions, and you write those criteria down, those principles down, so that when another one comes along, you can think, what is that other one, and what are my principles for doing it? And you'll refine those principles over a period of time. And you also are able to communicate with other people effectively. So it builds a culture in which we all can agree on what our principles are. So in doing that, well, that's what that coach tool does. It gets you easy access to that. Then there's another tool which you call the dot collector. The dot collector in meetings or outside of meetings, it tells what people think about each other, and it also does a number of things that I'm going to explain to you in a minute, and I'll show you how the tool works. And all of that data collection is put into what we call a baseball card, or it's about me and others. So now that data is collected on people, meeting by meeting, project by project, and so on. And then every day, there's the equivalent of a 360 review. And then you start to learn about yourself, and you start to learn about other people. So people usually at the end of the day, they go to this and they say, okay, what's the dot collecting like? And it serves the purpose also of, over a period of time, making the connection between the day-to-day behaviors and what the annual review looks like. Then there's a tool called an issue log. And what I did is I put into place this tool because I said, if there's anything that goes wrong, I want you to log it. If there's anything bad that you see that's bad, you log it. If you don't log it and I see it's bad and that happens 3 times, you're out of here. So that you're going to bring those problems to the surface. It makes management just so much easier because, let's say, if a manager, you're running a department, and you say, listen, I don't have to go look for all of the hidden problems that people want, that they have to log them, and they're issued like 1 to 5 in terms of severity, and I can go there and I can take a look at those problems. Then I can easily deal with those problems and go beyond those problems to think about how do I deal with it, how does my machine work to produce those problems and the like. That's what an issue log is. A daily update tool is a way that I and others keep in contact with each other. I have a number of direct reports, and I'm all over the place. And I want them to write down what they're doing, what their issues are, and I'll take a look at those. And then we'll have interactions, and I can get a picture that way. I also can very easily see data. So that, in other words, I could see what is the happiness level, what is the stress level, because it's so easy to just click happiness level 4, stress level 5, whatever that is, and I could see that all around the company, and I could see how it changes. So that way I can go to that part of the company or that place and then have a conversation with them. That's what the daily update tool is. Another tool I call is a pain button. And what I mean by that is, I have an expression that pain plus reflection equals progress. Because if something went wrong, you're being communicated. Nature gave us pain, psychological pain, for a reason, to signal us. And so if you reflect well on that, there's a way of operating. And the way that operates is it collects all of those things that are painful. And then it has reflections in terms of, is that a chronic pain? Is it always with the same person? And it specifies like, well, what are you going to do about it? What's your plan? And it monitors, did you execute that plan? And is that pain, and then how is that changing over a period of time? Like biofeedback. If the same pain is happening over and over again, and you're having with the same person, and you're not doing something, you could expect it to continue. And so it creates that kind of biofeedback. Then, of course, there are a lot of metrics or KPIs that we're looking for performance indicators. Then I created another tool which I called a contract tool. A contract tool is a tool where, you know, if we go into a meeting and we say, okay, you're going to do that and I'll do this and we'll do that, and it'll specify who's going to do what, when, at what date that will be completed. And then it makes it easy to know what your obligations are to others, because it'll maintain an ongoing flow of, hey, I'm supposed to deliver this, this, and the other thing, and here's my list, and if I do those things, fine. Or did somebody make a commitment to me, and are they doing it, so it allows that to follow through. And then, of course, there are disputes, arguments, different disagreements. So rather than just have those, I created a tool which I called a dispute resolver. If you have a dispute, okay, what are the protocols that you should go through to resolve that dispute? And I won't spend a lot of time describing it, but it deals with 3 different levels of dispute. You know, just you and I have a dispute. How can we deal with it together and so on? Or higher levels of dispute, the equivalent of like, how would you get a Supreme Court decision out of that dispute? So that's the series of apps that have been created. And my hope is to make those available to everybody, make them available to the public as I'm trying to put that out. What I want to do is just show you how one of the first tools that we'll put out, which I call the dot collector. I just want to show you how it works, and then we'll talk about it. So this is the dot collector. A week after the U.S. election, our research team held a meeting to discuss what a Trump presidency would mean for the U.S. economy. Naturally, people had different opinions on the matter and how we were approaching the discussion. The dot collector collects these views. It has a list of a few dozen attributes, and so whenever someone thinks something about another person's thinking, it's easy for them to convey that assessment. They simply note the attribute and provide a rating from 1 to 10. For example, as the meeting began, a researcher named Jen rated me a 3, in other words, badly, for not showing a good balance of assertiveness and open-mindedness. As the meeting transpired, Jen's assessments of people added up like this. Others in the room had very different opinions. That's normal. Different people are always going to have different opinions. And who knows who's right? Let's just look at what people thought about how I was doing. Some people thought I did well, others poorly. With each of these views, we can explore the thinking behind the numbers. Here's what Jen and Larry said. Note that everyone gets to express their thinking, including their critical thinking, regardless of their position in the company. Jen, who's 24 years old and fresh out of college, can tell me, the CEO of the company, that I'm approaching things terribly. This tool helps people both express their opinions and separate themselves from their opinions to see things from a higher level. When Jen and others shift their attentions from inputting their opinions to looking down on the whole screen, their perspective changes. They see their own opinions as just one of many, and naturally start to ask themselves, how do I know my opinion is right? That shift in perspective of going above it and seeing the full range of views shifts the conversation from arguing over individual opinions to figuring out objective criteria for determining which opinions are best. Behind the dot collector is a computer that is watching what all these people are thinking, correlates it with how they think,
and communicates back to each of them based on that. Then it draws the data from the meetings to create a pointillist painting of what people are like and how they think. And it does all that guided by algorithms. Knowing what people are like helps to match them up better with their jobs. For example, a creative thinker who is unreliable might be matched up with someone who is reliable but not creative. Knowing what people are like also allows us to decide what responsibilities to give them and to weigh our decisions based on people's merits. We call it their believability. Here's an example of a vote that we took where the majority of people felt one way, but when we weighed people's views on the basis of their merits, the answer was completely different. This process allows us to make decisions not based on democracy and not based on autocracy, but based on algorithms that take people's believability into consideration.
Yeah, we really do that. So just to give you a little bit of more of an explanation and carry that through for the dot collector, which will be available to the world in the not too distant future, maybe 3 months or so. So it encourages people to freely express what they really think, independent of hierarchy. That creates ownership. There's no spin. And that ownership, people can't care if they have to bottle up their thoughts and then they don't own it. But when I have a principle, speak up, own it, or get out. Because if they have a problem and they're not speaking up, that's their problem. If they have a problem where they can speak up in a non-hierarchical way, that's what really creates an idea of meritocracy. It provides real-time feedback on strengths and weaknesses, like a daily 360 review. It helps people see things through others' eyes instead of just being stuck in their own minds. It offers, in the moment, computer-driven coaching on how to best handle a situation because it knows you, knows each individual person, knows their circumstances, reminds them, it knows what else is going on around them and can provide that coaching. It enables the polling of a group to make everyone's views transparent and to draw out important disagreement. Like right now, the only people we know who they're thinking of is the speaker. There's such a bottleneck, and all of you are thinking radically different views. Now, just imagine if it was all lit up because you're now communicating this way. And so now everybody right here, I would know what you're thinking. You would know what each other's thinking. That's a power because otherwise it's stuck in, the vocal cords. And then it allows believability weighted decision making. That's a whole other topic. In other words, I don't think autocratic decision making is best. When I started the company and ran it all along, I worried about being wrong. The markets teach you a lot of humility. I know that if I'm going to be stress tested, I'm going to be better off if I'm stress tested. And others are going to be better off if they're stress tested. So if we wherever the best idea comes from is where I want to get. What's what I want to get. And so by being able to say, rather than autocratic or democratic is stupid in terms of decision making because that treats everybody's values, abilities as being about the same. And that's not true. There's a big difference. So by being able to assign believabilities and almost do believability-weighted decision-making, you can make a lot of progress. And then it collects data from across the organization to create a rich picture of what's going on in the whole organization. And then it tracks individual performance through time, so people could see how they change or they don't change and what to do about that. So basically, it also converts data to intelligence. So when I say converting data to intelligence, it speaks to you. It communicates in that way. So what we've done over the last, I'd say 6 months or so, a lot of companies were very keen to do this. Big Silicon Valley companies and so on. I can't tell you all the names. But what we did is we put it into their environments so that they could customize it for themselves and make it better. So, for example, we used to have it on iPads, but then we put it on, handheld devices, and then operating in terms of certain ways. And what they've told me is that it has a big impact because 96% of all employees say that they want to hear feedback regularly. Typically, 60% want it daily or weekly. And so be able to give them feedback on a daily or weekly or moment-by-moment basis and then connect that to their annual reviews is a big deal to people. It also keeps them engaged. And 77% of HR executives believe that performance reviews are inaccurate because of these generalizations. You give once a year you sit down and you're trying to remember what it is, and everybody just has a different picture. Well, if you build them up piece by piece, they're more accurate. And then it produces a lot more engagement. So it was pointed out that that there's been growth in revenue over the last 7 years of companies with more engaged employees have had revenue growth of 2.5. So anyway, people are excited about that. So now, I would say to you as these things go out or to others, the real questions are, what do you want? You don't have to operate in an idea meritocratic way. You don't have to do anything that I'm saying. It has been the basis of our success. And so I would say there are 4 things that when you go away and you think about this, you might ask yourself. Do you want to have idea meritocratic decision making, and in what degree? Second, do you want to know what people are really like and what you're really like? Or do you want to hide that? Most people, it's a little bit embarrassing. It's like, being naked in front of the mirror or something. It's maybe not necessarily a pretty picture, but if you get past it, it's good. How truthful do you want to be with each other? And how transparent do you want to be with each other? You can do whatever you want. And then, do you want to have algorithmic decision-making part of your decision-making process? Or do you want to just keep it in your head? I guarantee you that you will fall behind. I think unless you do most of these things, including certainly the algorithmic decision-making. So that's it. And what I'd like to do is take your questions. Okay, I get some choices. How would you begin a cultural transformation toward an idea meritocracy when a firm may not have the benefit of technology and so on? The first thing is I think in any relationship, you're going to stand back and say, you have to say, how are you going to be with each other? And you have to flesh that out, because that's the culture. And it's true not just in an organization. It's true in your family relationships. It's true in anybody, to be clear about those things. So more important than any technology is to write down how you're going to be with each other. I see that I'm over time, so why do you think this type of management can work across all corporate and world cultures? That's a big statement. I would say across cultures, the book has been translated into 34 languages. And in China, I was told that it was the largest selling book last year. And, but in any case, a lot of books have been sold in different cultures and different languages. And I think that the idea of writing down one's principles, whatever they may be, and operating together on that basis is good. And if you look at the history through cultures, idea meritocratic behavior, that's Confucian came up with idea meritocratic behavior. Those types of things, they work. And collective decision making is far better than any individual decision making. So I think that it's an effective process. Anyway, I'm out of time. I did my 30 minutes, and thank you for your attention.
The 2019 Greenwich Economic Forum is brought to you by Bridgewater Associates. Meaningful work, meaningful relationships. Churchill Asset Management, Nuveen, a leading provider of senior and unitranche debt to middle market companies. Ropes and Gray, bright past, brilliant future. Aurora Capital, inspiring partnerships. And Gramercy Funds Management, we are emerging markets. Special considerations to Bank of America, life's better when we're connected. Noah Private Wealth Management, a leading wealth and asset management service provider in China. Goutai Jinan Futures, a leading brokerage firm for commodity futures and financial futures in China. China Industrial Securities, a comprehensive financial group providing full spectrum financial services in Hong Kong. And Titan Advisors, built like a hedge fund. Special thanks to the Financial Times and Greenwich Business Institute for hosting us. And thank you to all the sponsors who helped make this event possible. We'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away.